Tennessee Hollow was the kind of place where the sun rose slowly, as if it too had nowhere else to be. The town sat between two low green hills, wrapped in morning fog and the scent of cedar trees. Folks there didn't have much, but they had each other and their music. At the heart of the hollow stood St. Mildred's Church, a modest wooden building painted white, though the paint had long begun to peel. Its bell tower leaned a little to one side, and the pews creaked when you sat down, but nobody minded. Because when the choir sang on Sunday mornings, that small church felt as grand as any cathedral. They weren't professionals, just ordinary townspeople, farmers, teachers, and children. Yet together, their voices made the rafters tremble and the people weep. They sang for love, for loss, for hope, and leading them all was a woman named Clara May Whitlock, the voice of Tennessee Hollow. Clara May wasn't a preacher, though some said she preached better than most men behind the pulpit. She was the town school teacher, gentle but firm, with a calm voice that could hush even the rowdiest child. Her gift wasn't in discipline or grammar. It was in music that came from the soul. Every Thursday evening she'd open the doors of St. Mildred's for choir practice. Folks would shuffle in after supper, boots muddy, aprons still damp, and gather around the old upright piano, the air filled with the smell of candle wax and pine. Clara would clap her hands once and say, "All right, my angels of the hollow, let's make heaven listen." And they always did. Her choir included Pastor Elijah Boone, whose booming bass carried like thunder, Mrs. Hattie Grace, who could hit high notes that made even babies stop crying, and the youngest member, Samuel Porter, who everyone called Sammy. Sammy was 14, all freckles and nervous hands. He lived with his widowed mother in a small cabin near the creek and helped her milk cows before dawn. He had a terrible stutter that made him dread speaking in class. Words stuck in his throat like burrs. One Thursday evening he lingered outside the church window, listening. Clara May spotted him through the glass and stepped outside. "You've got ears for music," she said gently. "Come sing with us." Sammy shook his head. "Can't," he whispered. "I stuh." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't speak. Just sing." That night, Sammy joined in. His voice trembled at first, then grew strong and steady, without a single stutter. Clara May smiled through tears. "You see, child," she said, "the good Lord doesn't care how you talk, only how you sing." From that night on, Sammy never missed a practice. It was late December, the coldest one the Hollow had seen in years. The choir had just finished rehearsal for the Christmas service. Clara May lingered behind, touching the piano keys softly, humming Silent Night. Pastor Boone checked the lamps, as he always did, and locked the doors. But one lamp near the choir stand had a small crack in the glass chimney. No one noticed the faint trail of smoke it left behind. That night, while the townspeople slept under patchwork quilts, the embers inside the church glowed brighter. A gust of wind pushed through the cracks in the walls, and before dawn, the whole building was on fire. By morning, there was nothing left but charred timbers, and the old bell, melted and cracked in half. When the townspeople awoke, the smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. Clara May ran barefoot down the muddy path to the church. She fell to her knees in the ashes, coughing as she reached for what was left of her piano, just a few blackened keys. Pastor Boone stood beside her, hat in hand, his eyes full of tears. "We'll rebuild," he said, voice trembling. "The Lord gives, the Lord takes away." But deep down, no one believed him. For the people of Tennessee Hollow, St. Mildred's wasn't just a building. It was where they had prayed for rain, buried their loved ones, and celebrated their harvests. It was where music filled their hearts when life emptied their pockets. Its loss felt like losing home itself. In the weeks that followed, the town grew strangely quiet. Sundays came and went without hymns or laughter. The bell didn't ring. The children stopped playing near the ruins, afraid of what was left behind. Clara May stopped singing too. Her voice, once the town's light, had gone silent. Sammy still walked past the remains every morning on his way to the farm. Sometimes he'd hum under his breath, but the melody always died when he saw the blackened cross still standing, half burned but upright. He missed the sound of voices blending in harmony. He missed the feeling that music could hold the world together. One evening, he whispered to his mother, "Ma, what if God can't hear us anymore?" She brushed his hair and said softly, "Child, maybe he's just waiting for someone to sing first." One cold morning, Clara May walked the long path to the church ruins. She sat where the altar once stood, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. For the first time in weeks, she prayed out loud. "Lord," she whispered, "what's a choir without a home? What's faith without a song?" The wind rose suddenly, lifting the ashes into the air like gray snow. The burned timbers creaked, and for a fleeting moment, Clara swore she heard faint voices, not human ones, but echoes of her choir, singing Amazing Grace in the breeze. Her eyes filled with tears. The sound faded as quickly as it came, but something inside her changed. Maybe faith wasn't about buildings. Maybe it was about what couldn't be burned. That evening she lit a lantern and began walking from house to house. At each doorstep, Clara May knocked softly and said the same thing. "Bring your voices on Sunday morning. We'll sing again, not for walls, for one another." Some hesitated. "Clara, folks ain't ready." The fire took too much, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes that no one could refuse. By the time she reached the end of town, 12 people had promised to come. That Sunday, when the sun rose pale and cold, they gathered on the blackened ground where the church once stood. There was no roof to shield them, no pews to sit on, only ashes underfoot and the cracked bell above them. Clara May looked around and said softly, "This is still holy ground." They formed a circle, their breaths visible in the frosty air. Clara May raised her hand, and they began to sing. At first, the voices were shaky, uncertain, but as the notes rose, something remarkable happened. The sound didn't echo off walls. It carried freely into the open sky, drifting over the fields and the creek. The melody of "It Is Well With My Soul" filled the hollow, rising stronger with each verse. Farmers paused in their fields. Mothers stepped out onto porches. Even the birds seemed to quiet. When the last note faded, a stillness settled over the valley. Not empty, but full, like a deep breath after sorrow. And for the first time since the fire, the people of Tennessee Hollow smiled again. As the weeks passed, more people began to join them each Sunday. They sang in rain and cold, standing among ashes that no longer felt cursed. One morning, Clara May turned to Sammy. "Would you lead the next hymn?" The boy froze. "Me?" She nodded. "You've got a voice that reminds heaven we're still here." With trembling hands, Sammy stepped forward. The choir began to hum the tune of "How Great Thou Art." When he opened his mouth, his voice poured out strong and clear, carried by the wind across the hollow. There was no stutter, not even once. The people listened in awe as the shy boy they'd known since childhood sang like someone touched by grace. Pastor Boone's eyes filled with tears. "The Lord took our church," he whispered, "but He left us the song." As the final note lingered in the air, the cracked bell swayed slightly in the breeze and gave a faint, single chime, a sound so soft, yet so perfect, that every heart in the hollow knew. The music of St. Mildred's had never truly stopped. Word spread quickly through the valley. not of the fire, but of what rose from its ashes. People from nearby farms began walking down the dirt roads each Sunday, drawn by the sound of voices rising through open air. The once blackened ruins became a gathering place again. Children brought stools from home. Farmers carved benches out of spare lumber. Someone even built a rough wooden frame around the cracked bell so it could hang again, crooked but proud. Hiram Clark, a local carpenter who had lost his wife Margaret in the fire, spent his evenings repairing what he could. He rarely spoke, but one night Clara May found him alone, sanding a wooden cross he'd made. "Why do you still come, Hiram?" she asked softly. He paused, his hands trembling. "Because she loved to sing," he said. "And when I hear y'all, I can almost hear her again." From then on, every Sunday, Hiram stood in the back, eyes closed, lips moving silently in rhythm with the hymns. The people began calling their gathering place the Hollow Chapel. No roof, no walls, only faith and sky. One afternoon in the spring of 1902, a horse-drawn carriage rolled into town. The driver was a thin man in a dusty coat, carrying a notebook and camera. His name was Edward Finch, a journalist from Nashville. He'd heard whispers about a small Tennessee choir that sang without a church, a people whose songs rose from ashes. He found Clara May near the ruined piano and asked, "Ma'am, is it true? You sing here every Sunday, no matter the weather." Clara smiled. "We do, sir. The roof above us may burn, but heaven's still open." That Sunday, Finch stayed to listen. He wrote down every lyric, every name, every tear he saw. When the choir sang Amazing Grace, he quietly put down his pen, because writing couldn't capture what he felt. A week later, their story appeared in the Nashville Courier, titled "The Choir That Wouldn't Be Silenced." The world beyond Tennessee Hollow finally heard their song. By summer, wagons and carriages began arriving every Sunday morning. Travelers came from towns Clara May had never even heard of, Franklin, Columbia, even as far as Chattanooga. They came not to see a grand church, but to witness a miracle of spirit. Some brought money, others gifts, a box of hymnals, a new cross, candles, even a used piano. But Clara May insisted on humility. "Let's build with what the Lord gives, not what we demand," she said. Each Sunday, the crowd grew, rich and poor, black and white, old and young, all standing together on the same ground that once burned. It wasn't just a service anymore, it was a rebirth of community. Even nature seemed to join in. Wildflowers bloomed among the ashes. Birds began nesting in the rafters of the half-built bell frame. The music had found its home again. That summer brought not only visitors, but storms. One Sunday, black clouds rolled in just as the choir began their opening hymn. Thunder rumbled, and the crowd hesitated. Pastor Boone looked to Clara May. "Should we stop?" he asked. She shook her head. Her shawl whipped in the wind as she raised her hand. "We've sung through fire," she said firmly. "We can sing through rain." As the first drops fell, the choir lifted their voices louder. Lightning split the sky behind them, illuminating faces wet with rain and faith. Then, in the heart of the storm, something strange happened. The cracked bell rang once, though no one had touched it. Its tone was warped, uneven, but it carried through the storm like a heartbeat. When the rain finally stopped, every person in the hollow was on their knees, soaked, trembling, and weeping. They said later that it felt like God Himself had sung with them. A month later, Clara May received a letter sealed with fine wax. It came from Mrs. Eliza Langford, a wealthy widow from Nashville who had read Edward Finch's article. Her handwriting was elegant and sure. "Dear Miss Whitlock, your choir's courage has touched more hearts than you know. I wish to rebuild St. Mildred's in full. stone walls, stained glass, a pipe organ, all at my expense. Your people deserve a roof worthy of their faith. The offer spread through town like wildfire. People rejoiced, hugged, cried. After a year of singing beneath open skies, the thought of a new church, grand and beautiful, felt like a dream come true. But that night, Clara May sat by her window, staring at the letter in the lantern light. For some reason, her heart felt heavy instead of glad. The next Sunday, after service, Clara gathered the choir and townsfolk. The letter lay on the table between them. "I won't lie," she said softly. "This offer is a blessing. But I need to ask, would building new walls change what we've found here?" Silence. People exchanged uneasy glances. Sammy, now taller and more confident, finally spoke. "Miss Clara, when I sing here, I feel like heaven's listening. I don't think we need walls to reach God anymore." Mrs. Hattie Grace nodded. "The fire took the building, but it gave us something better. It gave us each other." One by one, the townsfolk agreed. So Clara wrote back to Mrs. Langford, "Dear Madam, we thank you for your generosity, but our home is already rebuilt, not in wood or stone, but in the hearts of all who sing here. May God bless you." And with that letter, the hollow chapel remained open to the wind and the sky. Weeks later, a wagon appeared on the dirt road. Two men carefully unloaded an upright piano, polished, beautiful, with a small note taped to its lid. "For the choir that reminds us that God listens everywhere." Eliza Langford. Clara May ran her hand across the keys. The sound was soft and pure. For the first time since the fire, she felt the weight of peace settle over her shoulders. The townsfolk placed the piano beneath the cracked bell. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the choir gathered and sang Amazing Grace once again. The notes floated upward, blending with the twilight air. For miles around, people paused in their work, listening to the sound, a sound born of sorrow, carried by faith, and crowned with joy. Years passed, and life in Tennessee Hollow changed. The world beyond the hills grew faster: railroads, telephones, automobiles. But in the hollow, the music stayed simple and true. Sammy grew into a young man, his once shy nature replaced by quiet confidence. His voice deepened into a warm, rich tone that could move anyone to tears. In 1909, he left for Nashville to study music. Before leaving, he told Clara May, "You gave me more than a voice. You gave me courage." Clara smiled proudly. "Then promise me one thing, Sammy. Wherever you go, keep singing for those who've lost their way." He kept his promise. Sammy performed across Tennessee, often telling audiences, "I learned to sing where even fire couldn't silence us." And though fame followed, he always returned home each Christmas to sing beneath the open sky of the hollow chapel. By 1912, Clara May had grown frail. Her once dark hair turned silver, her steps slower. Yet every Sunday she was there, wrapped in her shawl, leading hymns with trembling hands and unwavering heart. One autumn afternoon, she took ill. The townsfolk gathered around her bed, the same faces she had once led through ashes. Her breathing was shallow, her voice barely a whisper. "Keep singing," she told them, "no matter what burns, no matter what's lost." That evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, the choir stood once more in the hollow. They sang "Nearer, My God, to Thee," her favorite hymn. As their voices rose, a soft breeze stirred. The cracked bell above them, silent for months, rang once, clear and true. At that very moment, Clara May's hand went still, and her smile remained. The bell, they said, had rung her home. Years later, nothing remained of the old church except the bell frame and the wildflowers that grew thick where the pews once stood. But every year on the anniversary of the fire, people still came, not just from Tennessee, but from far away. They gathered where the ashes once lay and sang the songs Clara May had taught them. No microphones, no instruments, just human voices and open sky. Some said if you stood very still during the last verse, you could hear a faint harmony on the wind. Clara May's voice, gentle and eternal. Sammy, now gray-haired himself, always led the final hymn. His voice would tremble as he looked up at the cracked bell, and when the song ended, he'd whisper, "The church burned down, but the music never did." Beneath the bell stood a simple wooden sign, hand-carved by Hiram Clark long ago, the church choir that kept singing after the fire, 1901. Faith is not what survives the flames, it's what keeps singing through them.